All right, so I've had this article emailed to me probably at least a dozen times in the last 48 hours. So I'm definitely doing a video on it here to give you guys my thoughts on what's happening with Netflix. If you're not aware, I will link the article in the description box below. You can read this for yourself. We're not going to go through the whole thing. It's a fairly lengthy article, but essentially what they're talking about in this article is that there are many composers for a lot of the original content that Netflix has put out there that are coming to journalists like Hollywood Reporter and saying that Netflix is requiring buyouts, meaning that they're not providing for any back-end royalties. They want to save on all that money that they'd have to be paying to BMI or ASCAP, and they want to essentially just pay a one-time fee upfront to the composer for scoring or supplying original music for their original content. Okay. Now, most of the producers, I'd say pretty much every producer or composer that reached out to Hollywood Reporter is saying they don't like it. They don't think that it's fair. They're not really happy with this. They're feeling like they're being forced to do this kind of stuff. And I know many of you that sent me this article also feel the same way. Not fair, not a good deal, taking advantage of people's hard work. And obviously, as usual, the producer, the artist is always being like thought of last, and we're last on the budget, and we're the first to have our budget cut and all that kind of stuff. So I get all of that. That's not new. That's been something that we as musicians and producers have been dealing with in the world since the music industry has been created. Okay, so you guys know that. But in this video, I want to talk to you about a couple of things. And I think one of the most important things that at least helps me not panic, not freak out, not go, oh my gosh, the whole industry is collapsing and there's no hope for any of us. What helps me sort of stay above the kind of noise that this can sometimes generate in the producer musician community is to not think about it in terms of what's fair or unfair. Because since I was 3 years old, I figured out life wasn't fair. Okay, some people get good things that don't deserve it. Some good people get bad things that didn't deserve that. So fair and unfair, it really doesn't advance the conversation. It's certainly not going to be useful for you and in your career and the strategies that you want to employ. Okay, sitting around thinking that things are unfair, it keeps you in a very passive victim mentality and in a victim sort of energy level. So I don't think that that is the most effective way that you could be looking at this kind of thing. It's basically a filter that a lot of people do put on their vision as they look at these kind of stories. What I want to think about it in terms of it being an offer and basically a business model that Netflix is sort of floating out there. It's kind of a balloon they're floating out there and seeing if it's actually going to fly and pass, and if they're still going to be able to attract high quality composers and producers with this new business model. Okay, so if you feel that this is something you would not want to do, you don't want the back end royalty, or you do want the back end royalties, you don't want to just sign over your music and get that one-time fee and that's it, then do not work with Netflix. You have a lot of power, okay, especially if you have a lot of high quality content, a lot of high quality music. Just don't work with a company like Netflix. If they approach you or anybody you work with, your library partners are working with them, let them know, I do not want to be included on any conversations if Netflix, it needs music from us, okay? You have every right to do that. Nobody is going to force you to do this, okay? This is also not fraud or a scam. I think some people are also starting to get this kind of line kind of confused where they're like, well, if I'm not earning back in royalties, they're defrauding people. No, they're just offering a different business model, right? The entire industry right now is changing, right? There's going to be certain business deals that are better for composers. There's going to be some that are not as good or worse for composers. But one thing you can definitely count on is that the business and the industry that we're all in right now is in constant flux. And things like this are going to come up almost all the time because nobody has the law written down. It's not like the 10 commandments of the modern sync licensing agency world where we all have to agree to these rules. It's the Wild West. People are going to try to do, and I always think of this rather than fair or unfair, I think of it in terms of what can people get away with. That's really what happens. They're not going out and stealing people's music, right? That's not what's being accused here. They're not going out and saying, yes, we will pay you, and then they don't pay the composers. What they're saying, they're being 100% transparent, just saying, this is our new deal. We want to pay you one time up front. We don't want to pay the back end royalties, okay? So let's get out of the world. Is this a scam? Is this fraud? It's none of those things. You might not like it. You don't want to sign your music over to it. That's great. You can still feel that way. But this is just a different kind of an offer. Now, one thing that many of you maybe don't know is that currently the streaming royalties that you would be earning are pennies. I do get royalties actually from Hulu, Netflix, and a couple other services as well. Some YouTube, but it is literally almost nothing. It's almost not worth even printing it out on my statement and sending the check over to me. I mean, we're talking about pennies and pennies. Yes, something is better than nothing. I'm not going to say I'm not thankful for any sort of income that I can generate with my music. But right now, your royalties through something like Netflix are laughable. They are really, really, really small. So for me personally, if I were to, I haven't directly worked with Netflix and been offered one of these deals, but if they did come to me, I'll tell you my thoughts, how I'm thinking about it. If I want to get my tracks, let's say, placed into a cable show, a network show, something like that, where I know there's going to be some significant chances of it earning back in royalties and possibly going into syndication and airing over and over again, of course, I really almost don't care so much about the upfront fee. I care more about those back end royalties because that is my sort of primary bread and butter. But Netflix essentially, and streaming services might be the secondary source of income that didn't exist before. This is something that is fairly new in the last 5 to 10 years, right? So if there's a new marketplace, and this is going to be coming on board for new video game services that are blowing up all over the place, VR content, virtual reality consoles and video games and all that kind of stuff. There are going to be new markets. And who knows, in 5, 10 years, I can't even probably imagine the new marketplaces that we're going to be able to supply our music to. They're all going to have their different business models that they're going to throw at us as composers. So it's up to us to obviously stay educated and informed about what's happening with these business models and to decide for ourselves, is this something would it help or would it not help? For me, if they were offering $3,000, let's say, for one track, for one documentary or some original film that they're putting together, I'm personally not going to say automatically no to that kind of a deal because I know how little I would have made anyways in the royalties right now as it stands. Now in the future, of course, those royalties may grow, more subscribers, different rates might start to come into play, so those might grow. But as we stand right now at the end of 2019, you're not really getting too much in terms of those back-end royalties. It's really, really small. So if they're gonna pay me a large chunk of money, like let's say $3,000 for one track, that's a lot more actually than if I said, hey, you know what? I don't care about so much of an upfront fee. I just want those back end royalties. So in my situation, I would see an offer like this and go, you know what? Not a bad deal actually, because, for a little bit of work, maybe a day or two to create this one track, $3,000. I mean, of course, it's always like if they're asking for like a full score or if they're asking for 12 tracks, and it all depends on how much you're willing to do in terms of the time and the effort it's going to take. And then to also know that once that track is over there, it is over there. Like they control it. You can't do anything else with it. You can't monetize it. So, you kind of have to decide what works for you. But I always like to look at it this way rather than like, that's not fair and I don't want anything to do with that, because there might be certain situations in your career where this kind of a deal actually might enhance your income and not take away from it. So again, there are going to be definitely composers who, if it's been their full-time job to be composing for Netflix and that kind of a thing, and they have been getting, let's say, some significant royalties. I don't know what their royalty checks look like. This might be something for them. They go like, you know what, this model doesn't work for me. I don't want to do this anymore. They have to decide, okay, are you going to say yes to this? This is just an offer, okay? They're not stealing stuff from you. They're not defrauding you. They're not scamming you. They're changing, which they have a right to do. They're changing their business model. And then it's on you. We, the producers, we have the power to say, no, we don't want to do that. We're going to go find another outlet for our music and go serve another marketplace. So here's what I know is definitely going to happen. There's only two outcomes of this. And I know that there are other, we're going to talk about some other, there was another news story with Discovery Networks where this was kind of happening as well. So I'm going to talk about the same thing with that story, same thing here. There's only going to be two outcomes with this, so I can predict the future, okay? It's going to be a 50-50 between one of these two, okay? Number one, the producers and composers that are constantly supplying music to Netflix just go, okay, cool, we'll do that. Yeah, they'll kick and scream maybe. They might do, articles. They might, complain about it. But at the end of the day, they sign it. They sort of give their high quality music to them, and they just move on. If that happens, Netflix will continue on with this business model. Not rocket science. That's going to happen. Okay, so if they can get their high quality composers that are currently supplying them with music to say yes to this, then that balloon has been lifted, it's floating, and it is working, and they're saving some money. They might be paying a little bit more upfront for it, but they're not going to be paying those back-end royalties down the pipeline, okay? Number two, if the producers and composers that are working for Netflix or in the future get offered deals from Netflix that look like this, they just say, nah, not really for me. I want my back-end royalties. I'm not interested in just a one-time buyout kind of a thing. Then what'll happen is Netflix will start to lose its high quality composers and producers. Okay, it'll start reaching for the bottom of the barrel, having to go to maybe stock library sites or something else where they're not getting the highest quality stuff that they used to be getting from those composers and producers that are currently supplying them. So If they're okay with using low quality music, they will use low quality music. But if they're like, you know what, we're starting to see this kind of suffering of the quality of what we're putting into our content. And I think Netflix's brand, if you really think about what their entire brand is, it is high quality content. And that's where they're really, you can see where they're doing. They're moving into this direction more than licensing other people's content. They're really trying to become like the next HBO, a streaming HBO service where you really are going to be subscribing to Netflix just for the original content. That's what I think that's the market they're really trying to go into. They're spending a lot of money to be able to do it. And if they go in that direction, and producers are not supplying with that, and the quality goes down of the music and the content, and so all the content basically suffers because of this, Netflix will be forced to entertain a different approach, right? This balloon popped and it didn't work out, and they're losing their quality composers. They're going to have to entertain things where maybe they have just an exclusive period for 6 months to a year, and then you can take your music rights back. Maybe they will abandon this altogether and just go back to the traditional, we're going to do a sync fee and your back-end royalties, no work for hire, no transfer of rights, that kind of a thing. So it really is, it's always a tug of war between the content creators, which is also the music creators, and the distribution outlets like Netflix and Hulu and Amazon and all that kind of stuff. So it really is always this back and forth conversation between these two parties. So I do think that what we can do is realize that as producers and composers, we have a lot of power. Okay, this is not something that we have to feel, because I was, a lot of the language in here was like, I felt like I was being forced to do this. If you want to work with Netflix, you got to agree to their terms. Like, that's what they're putting out there, okay? Unless they literally are slapping handcuffs on you, throwing you in a jail cell and saying, make me some music, slave. Unless they're doing that, you're not being forced to do anything. It's just an offer, okay? And you have every right to say no to these offers. So hopefully, you know, videos like this can spread some awareness for other producers or composers that are not aware that this might be going on. And again, I am not going to tell every composer that goes to Netflix that if you agree to this, then you're selling us all out and you're a terrible producer and composer. It might be right for you in your career. It might be right for me in my career. It might not be right for either one of us, okay? But I think rather than think of it in terms of fair or unfair, or let's go get a petition, let's go do this, I think just think about this as in terms of it's a shifting landscape underneath us. And so we need to keep our eyes open for these different kinds of deals, and not just immediately because it's not the usual deal, think, that's not a good deal. Because like I just said before, you might be with these upfront fees earning a lot more from a streaming service than you would have ever earned anyways from those back-end royalties. So, and who knows? How do we know that Netflix will stay in business for years and years to come? Okay, if you've been following any news about them, not in the greatest financial position right now. And there are new services coming online, and you have all the other competitors coming to the space. So, you know, if you were depending on these royalties back in and Netflix collapses in a couple of years, well, bye-bye to your royalties, right? Unless those pieces of content get bought out by somebody else. So the whole thing, it's a moving puzzle right now, right? And so I just think just keep your eyes open. Evaluate every offer that gets thrown your way and evaluate on its own terms and think about it. Is it going to be, there's going to be trade-offs. There's no sort of 100% win-win on every single deal that you're going to get. You're going to have trade-offs. Even when working with music libraries, as I recommend you guys, there's going to be trade-offs between certain libraries and other ones. So you always have to evaluate each offer you get on its own terms, whether or not it's worth it for the time and the effort and the energy that you're going to put into this track to get it licensed by whatever outlet it is. And if it's Netflix, you got to decide, is this something you really want to do? Okay. So hopefully that helps. I might have made a lot of you guys mad actually with that, because maybe a lot of you guys thought I was just going to be 100% like, yeah, this is unfair and screw Netflix. No, it's not really my opinion. I just think that it's one of those things that attitude doesn't help. It really doesn't push the conversation forward, and it really doesn't empower too many of you that are producers or composers trying to make music licensing your full-time job. So, but I am really curious about your thoughts about this, where you feel this deal would be. Would it actually be a deal you would say, yeah, maybe I would go for it, or would you be 100% no, this wouldn't be anything I would touch, you know, with a 10-foot pole, because these are the sort of trying times in our industry that if this goes through with Netflix, you better believe other streaming services are watching this to see how's that, because they're all kind of like, how's that going to go? Are all the composers and producers going to hate Netflix? Is that going to hurt their brand? And if it does, we don't want anything to do with that. We're going to be proudly going out there and saying we pay our composers royalties, right? And all these different streaming services are in competition with each other, so they're definitely watching this to see what's going to happen. And yes, I'm aware of the Discovery Networks issue. I'll do another video about that particular thing. It's a similar thing, a little bit different, but it's a similar situation happening over there. So put your comments below, your thoughts, your opinions. I love to read them. And maybe I'll have another update on this video if I get a lot of pushback and a lot of interesting thoughts, because I know I'll learn a lot from you guys for sure. So please leave those comments below.